We've now completed our sound checks and our weather report from one end of the country to the other. I think we should publicize that on CBC so that we all know what the weather is across the country. We have colleagues. We are now an hour and 20 minutes behind where we were supposed to be. I propose that at least for the first hour, we complete the first hour, and then I'll seek guidance from colleagues as to how to complete the second hour. With that, I'm going to call on Minister Blair, clearly one of the most popular ministers before this committee. I'm hard pressed to know why he is quite so popular, but I'm putting it down to his charm and his good looks. So with that, I'm going to ask Minister Blair to truncate his remarks as much as possible so that we can try to get back on our timeline.
Very much, Mr. Chair, and I'll accept your remarks with respect to charm, but I'm afraid with respect to looks, it's contrary to the evidence before us. I'd like to thank the committee for the invitation today, and I'm pleased to present the 2021 Supplementary Estimate C and the 21-22 main estimates for the public safety portfolio. I'm very ably joined today by a number of my colleagues. In the interest of time, I will respectfully not introduce them, but I'd like to take the opportunity to acknowledge that during these incredibly difficult and challenging times over the past year, they've all stepped up to the plate, and they've been working diligently to keep our borders, communities, correctional institutions safe, and as well as protecting our national security. And today, Mr. Chair, I believe these estimates reflect that work. I'll go through the Supplementary Estimate C for 2021. In order to present these items chronologically, the approval of these estimates will result in funding approvals of $11.1 billion for the public safety portfolio. And that represents an increase of 3.3% over total authorities provided to date. I'll briefly share some of the highlights here as they relate to how we manage our critical services during the pandemic. The first is $135.8 million for the Correctional Services of Canada for critical operating requirements related to COVID-19. The second is $35 million for Public Safety Canada to support the urgent relief efforts of the Canadian Red Cross during the pandemic. And Mr. Chair, as you know, the many volunteers and staff of the Canadian Red Cross have been there to support Canadians from the outset of this pandemic, including at long-term care homes right across the country. And I would ask this committee to join me in thanking them for all of their service and providing help where it was needed most. And I'll also note, Mr. Chair, that this funding is in addition to the $35 million of Vote 5 funding to Public Safety from Health Canada to support rapid response capacity testing to be deployed to fill gaps in surge and targeted activities, including in remote and isolated communities. Included in these supplementary estimates is also funding to enhance the integrity of our borders and asylum system while also modernizing the agency's security screening system. This funding will ensure that security screening results are made available at the earliest opportunity under a reformed system. Mr. Chair, I'd like to take this opportunity to highlight that CBS employees have done a remarkable job in keeping our borders safe in response to COVID-19. I'd like to take the opportunity as well to thank them for their continued hard work in keeping Canadians safe. We're also working through these supplementary estimates to increase funding to end violence against Indigenous women and girls and to provide essential mental health services. For the RCMP, we are investing significant funds through both SUPs and main estimates to support improvements to federal policing investigative capacity by bolstering its capability with additional policing professionals, investigators, and scientists. This will be used to deal with federal policing initiatives, which include responding to money laundering, cybercrime such as child sexual exploitation, and national security such as responding to terrorism and foreign influenced hostile activities. Mr. Chair, if I may, I'll now turn to the 2021-22 main estimates. The public safety portfolio as a whole is requesting a total of approximately $10 billion for this fiscal year. And as I previously noted, the portfolio funding has remained stable over the last 2 years. I will endeavor to break down the numbers by organization. Public Safety Canada is seeking a total of $1.1 billion in main estimates, and this represents an increase of $329 million or 45.5% over the previous year. The bulk of this increase, Mr. Chair, is due to the grants and contributions regarding the Disaster Financial Assistance Agreements Program, or DFAA. It's an increase in funding based upon forecasts from the provinces and territories for expected disbursements under the DFAA for this fiscal year. Mr. Chair, this represents a critical part of my portfolio as the Minister of Public Safety and Emergency Preparedness. In these main estimates, increases also include $15 million for incremental funding to take action against gun and gang violence. And as this committee knows, I introduced Bill C-21 in the House not very long ago, a bill designed to protect Canadians from firearm violence and to fulfill our promise to strengthening gun control. Mr. Speaker, I know that this committee will have the chance to review that legislation at some future date, and I look forward to discussing it with them at that time. I want to now focus on a number of ongoing issues and our responses to them, starting with Correctional Services Canada, which is seeking $2.8 billion this fiscal year, which represents an increase of $239.8 million or 9.4% over the previous year. And this net increase is primarily due to a net increase in operating funding, which includes an increase for transforming federal corrections as a result of the passage of former Bill C-83. That bill introduced the new structured intervention unit model, and that bill represents a major change in the way our correctional institutions operate, and recent reports have been clear that more work must be done. Funding is just one part of the solution, and with the creation of data teams, efforts to replicate best practices nationally, and enhance support from independent external decision makers, I am confident that we will deliver on this transformational promise. I want to again acknowledge the troubled findings that were also made in the Bastarash report, which I know this committee has examined and reviewed with concern. We are seeking funds to establish the Independent Center for Harassment Resolution, and this will be responsible for implementing the full resolution process, including conflict management, investigations, and decision-making. Mr. Chair, we know that more work needs to be done, and I'd once again like to conclude by noting the importance of our oversight agencies. You will see in the mains, Mr. Chair, that we are seeking funding to increase funding for the Correctional Investigator's Office, the CRCC, and the ERC, the latter by close to 100%. And with that, Mr. Chair, I thank you and the members of the committee for your patience as I delivered my opening remarks, and I'm happy to answer questions about these estimates and the collective work of our portfolio that members may have.
Thank you, Minister, and thank you for your timeliness. With that, we'll turn to Mr. Motts, Madame Cara, Madame Michaud, Mr. Harris for 6 minutes each, please. Mr. Motts.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you again, Minister, for being here. Nice to see you again. Minister, I'm just curious if there's a reason why your Chief of Staff, Zita Astroveras, is refusing to respond to an officer of Parliament, that being the clerk of the Defence Committee, who has made numerous attempts for the last I'm aware of, to requesting testimony about the handling of the General Vance sexual harassment allegations in 2018. Will you commit today, sir, to ensuring that she appears ASAP?
Point of order, Chair.
Yeah. Yes, Madame Dema.
The minister's here to speak to public safety estimates and not about his staff and what they might have done or what they're being asked to do, but he's here to speak on this has nothing to do with that.
I see it as actually a valid point of order. I usually allow members a fairly wide range. If Mr. Motts, by some means or another, can tie his question into the estimates, it would be helpful to the chair. Sure.
She's part of the team, Mr. Chair, and therefore is part of the estimate. So, yes, it is relevant. I just like to have the minister, certainly uphold his the parliamentary rules and democracy in his rule of office. So if he can't answer that or refuses to commit, then I guess we have our answer. Thank you, Chair. I'd like to also, Minister, you and I have had a number of conversations personally about getting some help for Shelley McGuinness Wynn, the widow of slain RCMP officer David Wynn, who was slain back in 2015. You have promised every time, sir, to get someone from your department to reach out to her and to help her. And over the last year and a half that you and I have had these off and on conversations, that has yet to occur. And I'm just wondering why we have to keep having this conversation about doing the right thing and having her and many others like her, sir, having access to the benefits that they're entitled to.
Thank you very much for that very important question. And of course, I actually I recall those conversations very well. Fortunately, today I'm joined by the Commissioner of the RCMP, and as your question directly relates to an HR matter for her department, I would invite her to offer any kind of a response.
Commissioner Lucky.
Thank you, Minister, and thank you for the question. First of all, obviously, my heart goes out to Shelley for the loss of Constable Wynne. We've actually received several correspondence from Miss McGinnis Wynne, and we have been dealing with her directly. And she has a family liaison in Alberta, and there's been quite a few back and forths with compensation questions, and we have been doing some calculations for her and getting some necessary information that she has been having trouble getting. So there's been a constant back and forth, and I think she's pretty well got the information that she has requested up to date.
I won't belabor the point, Commissioner. Back to the Minister. I've spoken to her as recently as last evening, and she does not. And it's more than just the RCMP, sir. It rests with you, and I would encourage you to continue to follow up with that. Sir, I just want to move on to the buyback. This is the third meeting that you've been in front of us, and you've been asked the funding amounts for this firearms confiscation program that you have announced, and I don't see it anywhere in the estimates. I've looked. I can't find any estimates here that you want to cover off the cost of this confiscation. And how many billions of dollars do you anticipate this buyback costing the taxpayer, sir?
Yeah, thank you very much for the question, Mr. Motz. It gives me an opportunity to clarify something. I would just point out in the legislation that we've introduced, there is strong new regulations that creates a new regime placing additional restrictions upon the weapons that were prohibited by order in council back on May 1st. And that's what's in the legislation. And that legislation is going to be very important to facilitate an efficient, orderly, and responsible buyback program, which we've committed that we will bring forward. But we'll bring it forward when the legislation advances through the House. And I understand you're anxious to see that outcome. I'm looking forward to your support to move this legislation through the House and through committee as expeditiously as possible.
Well, Minister, if it actually was to improve public safety, you'd have my full support. It doesn't, so I won't be supporting it. In June, June of 2020, I asked you how many toys on this firearms ban were you banning, including in this ban? And you said that was an absolute lie spread by the firearms owners. And I'm wondering what happened. We now have airsoft banned, and you're destroying hundreds of companies in this country, thousands of jobs, and the pastime of tens of thousands of Canadians. Who's safer by this proposal?
Yeah, Canadians are, Mr. Motz. By the way, when you asked me the question, last June, you asked about the order in council, and of course, replica firearms weren't dealt with in that order in council, but they are in Bill C-21. That's in direct response to urging that we've received from police leaders across the country. Today, Mr. Mott, I spoke to Chief Neufeld in Calgary, and just on March 4th, two of his officers were involved in a tragic incident where somebody pointed what they obviously believed was a real firearm at them. They discharged their weapons. A woman died. There's now an independent investigation going on. It's extremely traumatic for those officers, and traumatic for the community as well.
Yes, thank you, Minister. I'm fully aware of that. One last question I have, Minister.
These represent a danger.
Minister, I have one last question for you.
Unfortunately,
I still got 40 seconds left.
Gone over the.
Chair, I still got 40 seconds. A point of order was brought up, and my time was used, and I still have the 40 seconds based on my clock, sir.
No, the clock was stopped during your point of order, and you're now at 6.5 minutes. Just 6 minutes and 21 seconds. So I'm sorry about that. With that, I'm going to move on to Madame Kara for 6 minutes, please.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Minister, for being here. I echo what John said earlier. I feel like you're part of this committee because I see you here so often. It's good to see you. Thanks again for being here. Minister, we know this pandemic has shown a light on the vulnerabilities that exist in our communities, especially minorities, visible minorities, whether it is Black Canadians, South Asian Canadians, Muslim Canadians, and Asian Canadian populations. We know that since the start of the COVID-19 pandemic, anti-Asian racism has been on the rise and has only escalated, even though we know it existed before that. StatsCan last summer reported that visible minorities experience an increase in harassment or attacks based on their race, ethnicity, or skin color, which tripled compared to the rest of the population since COVID-19 pandemic started, with the largest increase among Chinese and Korean Canadian population. All that, Minister, coupled with the recent events in the US, it is very real and it's very concerning. Can you perhaps talk a bit about the work that you're doing undertaking to fight violence fueled by hate, racism, and discrimination in all its form?
Thank you so much, Ms. Kara. And this is actually a very important question, not just for the public safety portfolio, but for all Canadians. And what we have seen is a very disturbing and concerning rise of racism, intolerance, and hatred, not just in our society, but right around the world. And many of these issues have been aggravated by the pandemic, but they don't begin there. And so our response, I think, must be very comprehensive. I can tell you that, in response to growing concern right across Canada about the very significant and serious incidents and increase of hatred directed towards Asian Canadians. And by the way, I spoke to the chief of police in Vancouver about this. Last week, in response to these events, I reached out to police leadership right across the country, in every part of the country, and I engaged them in a conversation about our collective response to these acts of hatred. The chief of Vancouver tells me they've seen a 770% increase in hate crimes directed towards Asian Canadians. And this is completely unacceptable. And I also reached out today and spoke to the executive of the CACP and raised the issue once again about our collective response. We spoke, for example, about the tools that they need and resources they need to deal with online hate. I advised them that our government is working on bringing forward legislation for the removal of online harms, including online hate, the preservation of that evidence, and ensuring that the police and law enforcement have the access to the evidence and the tools they need to deal more effectively. We talked about how certain other measures, including the red flag laws that are introduced in Bill C-21, can be used to deal more effectively for those who are online advocating violence against women, religious minorities, or ethnic minorities in this country. They should not have access to firearms. They represent an unacceptable risk. And so we talked about those tools as well. And I can tell you that all of my agencies, it is our most important discussion. And we acknowledge that ideologically motivated violent extremism, which includes all of those hatreds and biases and intolerance that concern all Canadians, or they should concern all Canadians, is at the forefront of, because ideologically motivated violent extremism represents the greatest threat to domestic security to all Canadians. And Ms. Kara, there is no place for racism and intolerance anywhere in our society. And certainly, I want to assure you that all of our agencies and departments understand that they have a responsibility to take action. And we're looking at all the tools and resources they need to ensure that we are able to do that.
Thank you, Minister. And just on the same topic, I know in the main estimates you were seeking increased funding for the security infrastructure program, and I believe we have quadrupled the funding since forming office. What role does this program play in protecting communities at risk, including the ones I had just mentioned?
I'll try to be brief, but it's such a great program, and it provides resources to religious institutions, community organizations who are at risk and who are vulnerable and too often the target of hatred and intolerance. And so we have quadrupled the funding for the security infrastructure program, but I will tell you it's always overprescribed. And so we work very closely with all of the organizations who seek this funding. We encourage them to participate. It's proven to be a valuable asset to them. It helps them improve the security infrastructure. It's a part of society's response, and we're going to continue to support those organizations. But we also know that our departments and agencies, law enforcement and national security, have a responsibility here as well, and we're going to step up on every front.
Thank you. How much time do I have?
You have about a minute.
Okay, thank you. Maybe you could just briefly talk about the issue of oversight. I know you mentioned in the main estimates that you're seeking increase for the level of funding. Investigator 3% more than last year, CRCC, which I believe is 2% more than last year, and the external review committee for RCMP, which is increased by as much as I believe 100% more than the year before. In your opinion, why is it so important for these agencies to have this effective oversight? And will you be reintroducing legislation to bring oversight to the CBSA?
And the answer is yes. The reason, if I may sum up the reason in one word, and it's trust. Without the public's trust, without the consent of the people who are policed or who are subject to, the actions of our border officers or in corrections, without that trust, we can't serve appropriately. And all of the agencies, certainly the RCMP, CBSA, CSIS, and corrections, all understand the importance of maintaining public trust, and that's why independent civilian oversight is such an important component of that. And when I say independent, people don't have an expectation, for example, that the police will investigate themselves. And so independent oversight of complaint resolution is I think, the best way to make it effective. We have begun with the interest.
We're going to unfortunately have to leave it there.
Thank you.
Madame Michaud, 6 minutes, s'il vous plaît.
Merci, Monsieur le Président. Bonjour.
Thank you, Chair. Hello, everybody, and thank you for being here. In recent weeks, there seems to have been a resumption of violence against women. In Quebec, for example, we had 7 femicides in recent weeks, and last March 10th, you said, Mr. Minister, that you wanted to combat this conjugal and women-related violence. One of the questions raised was solutions through the Bill C-21 that you tabled on February the 16th. In fighting against contraband and smuggling and firearms traffic, and you talked about the yellow flags, and you talked about initiatives against gang and gun violence, and you talked about $6 million. Have these expenses already been committed, or is this something that's in the legislation, and so if the bill isn't passed, we will not see any action taken in this direction? Or has there been any spending regarding violence against women?
Assure you that there has been significant spending against violence. I agree with you that violence against any vulnerable population is unacceptable, but violence against women is deeply concerning. And what we have seen during the pandemic is an unacceptable increase in gender-based violence, violence directed at women in domestic situations and in society generally. And that's why we've introduced the first ever federal strategy to address gender-based violence in 2017, and why we are working. I'm working with the minister. Have waged for a national action plan to end gender-based violence. We've made a number of very significant investments over the past year. For example, over 1,500 frontline organizations that deliver essential services to survivors of gender-based violence have received significant benefits. Over 6 million people benefiting each year from the important work of these organizations. And we are also making other significant investments. When cases of GBV were increasing at the onset of the pandemic, we took some swift action. We provided over $100 million in emergency COVID funding to more than 1,000 organizations providing services directly to the victims of gender-based violence. And so there are investments in policing, there are investments in security. We are bringing forward other legislation that's relevant to this, but we recognize in these circumstances, the organizations that do the work in communities on the ground need our support, and we've been working very hard to make sure that they receive that support. It's reflected in the budgets that I bring before you today.
Merci.
Thank you. And the number of violent gun crimes has increased by 642 from up to 3,503. And again, through the Bill C-21, you said that you are seeking to strengthen the RCMP and CBSA's capacities to fight the illegal importation of firearms. But according to the departmental plan for 2021, for CBSA, the expenses are supposed to drop every year till 2024. So how can you explain that? And how are you going to be able to do more with less?
To be clear, there is a reduction in their expenditure, and it's the result of they have concluded an infrastructure program that was funded over a number of years. That infrastructure program has now been concluded, And so we no longer need to continue to fund the implementation of that. And so that accounts for the reduction. But we have made other significant investments in CBSA. They have, notwithstanding, they've had to do extraordinary things during the pandemic, because in addition to their responsibilities for border security and border integrity, to determine the eligibility of people to enter, for example, or to detect and stop contraband material, they've had to continue with all of their responsibilities. They enforce over 90 laws. Just last week, the RCMP and CBSA were involved in the seizure of 249 handguns, for example, that were being smuggled into Canada from New York State into the province of Quebec. And so that was excellent work done by our officials. And so I offer that example just to provide you with assurance that our agencies remain very much focused on preventing contraband material, particularly in their responsibility to interdict the supply of guns. I also want to take the opportunity to advise you in my conversations with the United States. I reached out to the new Secretary of Homeland Security. We are establishing a new bilateral cross-border task force to deal with gun smuggling on both sides of the border. We know that the United States is the source of many of our guns, and close collaboration with Homeland Security and the Alcohol, Tobacco, Firearm Agency in the United States with our officials, we think in the sharing of information is going to be key to our success in keeping those guns out of Canada.
1 minute, s'il vous plaît.
Merci.
1 minute. Thank you. Since we're talking about the U.S. border between Canada and the U.S., I'd like to ask whether the government has decided to appeal the safe country legislation, safe haven legislation, which was invalidated. You've already talked about, or the government has already said that Roxham Road is going to become what it had been after the end of a temporary agreement with the U.S. based on COVID-19. Is any sum of money allocated for this to deal with perhaps the increased influx of asylum seekers or people who are going to be crossing the border at this time, or perhaps as soon as COVID-19 will be behind us, when this point will become active again?
Yeah, thank you very much for the question. It's an important issue. I will tell you that the conditions do not yet exist for a lifting of the restrictions between Canada and the United States at the border. We did implement very effective measures to restrict the movement of irregular migrants at Roxham Road. At the same time, we're working with the United States. We are in discussions with respect to the future of the Safe Third Country, and as you know, that matters also before the courts. And so we'll proceed with all of those important activities in order to ensure that we maintain the integrity of our borders and at the same time remain a welcoming country to those who are seeking asylum and refuge in Canada.
Thank you. Mr. Harris, 6 minutes, please.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Minister, for joining us today. Of course, we had this week a report from the Civilian Review and Complaints Commission of the RCMP on the Colton Bushy matter with a number of recommendations. What I would like to know, first of all, is how do you, not Commissioner Luckey, but how do you plan to ensure that the recommendations are actually implemented? Because we know there's no real mechanism to report back to the CRCC on the recommendations. How do you plan to, as the only real oversight, to ensure that takes place?
Yeah, thank you very much, Mr. Harrison. It's an important question. Let me first acknowledge the importance of the report from the CRCC. I know the Commissioner and the RCMP have acknowledged and committed to responding positively to all of the recommendations that have been made, but I don't disagree. It is my responsibility to oversee the implementation of those recommendations, and on behalf of Canadians and Parliament, ensure that the response is appropriate. But in addition to those very important recommendations arising from that event, let me first acknowledge that the way in which the Colton Bushy family and Mrs. Baptiste in particular were treated was unacceptable. And we deeply regret that.
Sir, it's been condemned by Parliament today, a unanimous consent motion condemning and denouncing the racism disclosed in the report, and also acknowledging that the report revealed that the RCMP destroyed records of police communications the night that Colton Bushy was killed, and condemned the cover-up. So we know that, and that's a terrible thing. The House has recognized that. My question to you is, how are you going to ensure that the recommendations are followed? That's the key point there. I don't have much time, sir, as you know. So please don't gobble up the time with other comments.
All right, I thought I was responding to your question, and so I'll endeavor to try. I meet on a regular basis with the commissioner of the RCMP. I have a responsibility, and I get regular updates from the commissioner on their activities. We are also very much engaged. I'll refer you back, and I know you don't want to go back to the speech from the throne, but
no, I don't want to go back to the street from the throne. I'm asking you. I'm asking you how you follow it.
We made very significant commitments of reform and improvements in oversight, and we are working forward on those.
So we see, though, that the principal oversight body at the moment, the CRCC, has a reduction in its budget. The commissioner has complained that she has inadequate funds to do both the complaints that are being brought to her, plus the systemic complaints for which she was given the power, the commission was given the power to undertake in 2014, and that the Colton Bushy case alone cost $1.2 million going back to last December. But we're seeing a decrease in her budget year over year. And so why are we not providing the kind of money? And she says that she needs about a 50% increase in her budget to do a proper job, but even 30%, which would be $3 or $4 million, would make a big difference. But we see a decrease, not an increase. Why is that?
Yeah, thank you very much. And in fact, you're not correct. The funding for CRCC is actually up over these two. It's not a great deal, but more funding will be brought forward with the legislation in the reintroduction of our bill for civilian oversight of CBSA, which will also include significant new enhancements with respect to oversight and timelines and accountability for the RCMP. All of that work is coming. We've introduced that legislation twice, Jack, and I'm looking forward to bringing it forward again and your support as we do so.
Speaking of the CBSA, Minister, you mentioned a couple of times that the increased border interest in border smuggling and enforcement of that, yet the CBSA budget for border enforcement has actually gone down by about $20 million from 2 years ago. And what we're seeing as well is that, we know that the over 1,000 CBSA officers were removed from the CBSA by the previous government, the Conservative government. You've replaced maybe 160 or 180 of them. So where is the increased availability to carry out this anti-smuggling issue that we think is very important, particularly with respect to guns? Where is the money for that?
Yeah, I think it's very important too, and I'm going to invite the president of the CBSA to talk about his staffing and his budget.
But we can do that. We can do that in the second half of the meeting, sir. I'd like to know.
I thought you might want. I thought you might want the answer now, and he'll be able to provide you with the particulars of that, Jack.
Yeah, well, you don't have an answer yourself as to where this money is coming from.
Well, I can tell you that the CBSA asked for and is getting in these estimates $30.8 million this year alone for smuggling, and to the establishment of the U.S. task force, and so that's the data I got in front of you.
Is that an increase of $30 million, or is that the total budget for dealing with smuggling?
Well, it's broken down in the data, and that's why I asked if the president could provide confirm an answer with respect to what that represents.
You have about 30 seconds, Mr. Harris.
Well, the 30 seconds, I guess we might have had an answer if the minister had one for us. I don't mean to insult you, sir, but that was I expected you to be able to tell us whether it was new money or not.
I'm not insulted by your question.
Well, I think that uses up my time, Chair, but thank you for saying that, sir.
All right. Well, I found in my relationship with the minister that it's very difficult to insult him. We now move to the 5-minute round. Mr. Van Popten, Brabus, Madame Michaud, Mr. Harris, Mr. Turek, and Mr. Yakino. So, Mr. Van Popten.
Good. Thank you, Mr. Chair. And good afternoon, good evening, Minister Blair. Good to see you here. I have a question about, thank you. I have a question about Canada's other pandemic, fentanyl, opioid overdose crisis across the country, and certainly here in my home jurisdiction of Metro Vancouver. And yet we don't see any real plans for combating the real problem, and that is the illegal importation of fentanyl into our country. That's a CBSA question. What are the plans around that, sir?
Thank you. It is a terribly important question, and we have seen an unacceptable increase this year. And the numbers were already tragic and unacceptable, and it's gotten worse in this year of pandemic. And I agree with you, sir. Actually, I've spent a fair portion of my life prior to coming to Ottawa dealing with the transnational organized drug crime, and I'm well aware. This is not just an issue, by the way, for CBSA, but there are a number of very significant steps taken with CBSA in increasing their capacity, not just by people, but also in the use of new technologies and new authorities. And for example, one of the ways in which we saw fentanyl was being too frequently imported illegally into this country was through the mail system. And so we brought forward additional new measures and controls over that method of importation so that the CBSA can deal with it effectively. But in addition, need to take, and those are transnational in nature. That is the responsibility of the RCMP, and it's why I hope you see reflected in these estimates that we've provided a significant additional investment in the federal policing role of the RCMP, because it's in that federal policing capacity, which deals with organized crime, drug smuggling, and money laundering, that is so important in dealing with that. And I would also, just finally, if I may conclude, I've also had conversations today with the executive of the Canadian Association of Chiefs of Police, who also expressed very similar concerns, but also want to see the government move forward on responding to their plea that this be dealt with more as a public health crisis. And so the interdiction of the supply of fentanyl and precursor chemicals, illicit opioids into this country remains a very significant focus for this government and our agencies, but we're also introducing harm reduction measures so that we can keep people safe. And I think that the combination of those two things is really important.
Okay, I understand that that there are many tools available to fight a problem like this, but you know, this problem has been with us for many years. It's not just in the last year, and yet things seem to be going in the wrong direction. So I want to focus again on the illegal importation. Like, where are these drugs coming from? Why can Canada not solve this problem? Why can we not get these illegal drugs, these harmful drugs that are killing so many people, off our streets?
Yeah, thank you very much. And the interdiction of the chemicals used in their production and for dangerous drugs like fentanyl and other drugs are often part of it. It's a transnational organized crime activity. We know, and I've said this publicly previously, that many of the chemicals used in the manufacture and many of these drugs come from other places in the world, primarily Southeast Asia. I can tell you that we were very closely, I have very close relationships with the UNODC, the United Nations Office of Drugs and Crime, that are very much overseeing investigations in all parts of the world. The RCMP are known internationally as leaders in those investigations, and we participate with our Five Eyes partners and with other international organizations to interdict the supply. It remains a significant challenge, not just for Canada, but around the world. And that's why it's also important, notwithstanding our best efforts at supply interdiction, we also have to work to reduce the demand for these drugs, and for those who are using these drugs problematically, then we also have to ensure that we implement strong public health-based harm reduction measures to keep people alive. And so, as you say, there are many tools, but I want to assure you that it's why we're investing significantly in enhancing the federal policing capacity. And Mr. Rampopta, I'm not sure whether you're aware of this, but in 2013, an enormous amount of funding and resources and staffing was removed from the RCMP, had a very deleterious effect on their federal policing capacity. And we've been working tirelessly over the past 5 years to rebuild that capacity, because Canadians depend on the RCMP in their federal policing role to deal with that very problem of the transnational organized crime responsible for importing drugs.
You have about 15 seconds, unfortunately.
Well, unfortunately, things seem to have been going in the wrong direction over the past 5 years that this government has been in office. But my time is up. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Madame Lambropoulos.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Minister Blair, for being here, and to all of the officials who are here to help answer our questions today. A couple of issues that are of concern to me have already briefly been touched on, but I would like a little bit more details with regards to them. So many of the members of the Saint Laurent community, of which I'm a part of and which I represent, are quite concerned about gun violence. It's been on the rise, I believe. And so, like in my province of Quebec, gender-based violence as well has been on the rise. In the last 7 weeks, I believe 7 women have been murdered at the hands of their partners. So I was just wondering, specifically with regards to gender-based violence. I know you spoke about working with the minister to ensure that women get the protection that they need. A lot of women are turned away from shelters because there are not enough spaces in shelters, and I know that that's not necessarily your domain. However, I'd like to know what kind of work you guys are doing together in order to help make women safer.
Yeah, thank you very much, and it is a critically important question. The Minister of Women and Girls, Minister Monsef, is and I are responsible for bringing forward the national strategy. We've been working on a number of different elements, and there are very significant components of this. But you're absolutely right. I think it's important to acknowledge the organizations that provide shelter and support to women fleeing domestic violence, and for them and their families a safe place to go. And so we've actually just in this pandemic year expended over $100 million to support those organizations and to create that safe space for women who are fleeing domestic violence. We also are looking at a number of different legislative responses with respect to online harms, which can include gender-based violence and hatred. We're also, and I've mentioned earlier, in some of the legislation we're bringing forward in firearms. Let me just speak about that just for a moment, if I may. Every 5 days, a woman is killed in this country in a domestic violence incident, and over 500 times a year, they are victimized with firearms. And we know that the presence of a firearm in a home that is experiencing gender-based violence and domestic violence, that's a dangerous situation made deadly by the presence of a firearm. And so we're bringing forward new tools. And I've been meeting with organizations across the country. Many of them are very concerned about how they could implement those new measures. They see them as valuable and it's important, but they're going to need support. And so that's another commitment that we've made, that we'll provide them with financial and other supports that they're going to need to make this effective to keep people safe. And the one thing I can say, if I may, I've had a conversation just in your area. I've recently had a conversation with both Deputy Chief Cabano and Chief Caron of the SPVM. To talk about what they're doing with respect to gun violence in their community, including gender-based violence, and the supports that they need. We've talked about some of the money that we've made available through the province of Quebec for municipal police services and doing their work. And we've also talked about our commitment to bring forward $250 million over the next 5 years to invest in communities, to invest in those circumstances that give rise to gun violence in all of our communities right across the country. And that investment will be in those community organizations that do extraordinary work. And I'll be looking for assistance and guidance from members of parliament from all parties right across this country to make sure that we make those investments with the best effect of keeping people safe.
Thank you very much. I really appreciate that. And I'd love to get a call from you to help so that I can help in that regard. Another question that I have is related to stricter gun laws. Of course, we've announced that that's part of the plan and that we're moving ahead with this, but a lot of illegal guns are brought in from the border. I know other people have touched on this as well. What do you have as a plan, Minister Blair, with regards to making it less easy to smuggle guns at the border? What I know that the estimates are one thing, officials may have a certain plan forward, but as a minister, where's your leadership in this?
Yeah, in a number of places. First of all, there are 3 ways in which criminals gain access to guns. They're either smuggled across the border, they're stolen from legal gun owners or gun stores, or they're criminally diverted where people buy them legally and sell them illegally. And Bill C-21 addresses all 3 of those ways in which guns get into the hands of criminals. And specifically at the border, we're increasing the maximum penalty, which I think will demonstrate to the courts Canadians' concern and denouncement of gun smuggling, and to hold those individuals and organizations, this is an organized crime activity primarily, and to hold those individuals to account. We're also making sure that the police have access and our border officers have access to the data and information that they need in order to be effective to detect that activity of gun smuggling. And we're adding additional resources as well to both the police, the RCMP and municipal police services, and our border service officers. And finally, I will tell you, from many years of experience, without working collaboratively and cooperatively with U.S. authorities, we can't be completely successful because they are the source of so many guns. And that's why we've reached out to the Department of Homeland Security to establish a new International Border Crime Forum and a bilateral task force to deal with gun smuggling from both sides.
We are going to have to leave it there.
Thank you very much.
It seems like run-on conjunctive sentences seem to be the order of the day. Madame Michaud, 2.5 minutes, s'il vous plaît.
2.5 minutes for Madame Michaud. Thank you, Chair. Minister, I'd like to hear what you have to say about fraud. According to the Anti-Fraud Center, in February 2021, there were 11,000 plus fraud reports and 246 fraud victims and over $4.6 million of financial losses due to fraud. Having spoken to police, they just deal with this endlessly, all these complaints regarding fraud, particularly regarding CERB. I was wondering whether in the various budgets that you have for public safety, is there any amount of money allocated to help citizens who have been victims of fraud, perhaps either to compensate them or pay the bills in their stead, and make the people responsible for fraud accountable? Or is this really just something that's limited to the RCMP? Is there some sort of plan to combat fraud at at your department's level?
Fraud can take many, many forms. And what we're also seeing is online frauds and cybercrime generally. We've seen a significant increase, and particularly during the pandemic, I think people have been made more vulnerable. And there are a number of very concerning circumstances where seniors and vulnerable people have been particularly targeted with respect to fraudulent activity. Now, from a criminal investigative standpoint, it is the responsibility of the police of jurisdiction. So, for example, in the city of Montreal, that would be the SPVM. In other jurisdictions, it might be the SECU. And in addition to that, the RCMP at C Division in Quebec, and I'll speak specifically to Quebec, but the police of jurisdiction issue is relevant in every case. But if it's a tier 1 organized crime activity related to fraud, that is the responsibility of the federal police in C Division, the RCMP. And so all 3 orders of government and all 3 orders of police services have a responsibility there. We are also looking at ways in which we can deal with many of the online harms. And I can tell you the RCMP have been very active in a number of significant investigations because the source of these frauds is not domestic in many cases, but it's actually taking place in other countries. And then people are being victimized in Canada. And that's where the RCMP plays a very important role in their federal policing role and responsibilities to work transnationally with police of other jurisdictions in other countries in order to address that criminal activity that is victimizing Canadians. And so that is primarily within the public safety portfolio, our responsibility. But I can tell you there are many implicated agencies in dealing with online harms and online threats and criminal activity within the online space, including the finance department through FinTrack, for example. And so we're all engaged in this.
We're going to have to leave it there. Mr. Harris, 2.5 minutes.
Thank you, Chair. Mr. Blair, you talked about the changes in the SIUs as a result of Bill C-83. We do know that from Mr. Anthony Dube, Dr. Dube, his most recent report, that we still have a situation in the prisons that there is solitary confinement still going on to the extent that meets the accepted international definition, including by Canada, of torture. 1 in 10 inmates who are subjected to these SIUs are subjected to this. What do you intend to do about that? That's a shocking thing for Canada to find from the report of Anthony Dube. What do you intend to do about that? Are you going to fix this, and how soon?
Yeah, absolutely. We're going to fix it. And you'll see in these estimates, we're bringing forward additional resources to make sure that we can fully implement Bill C-83 and the SIUs right across this country. Jack, I'm not making any excuses. I accept the findings of Dr. Dube's report. I've met a number of times with Dr. Dube. Actually, I've known him for almost 40 years. I have great respect for him. I also have great respect for the external review investigators that have also been looking at these issues. There are issues of implementation that have been challenging, particularly during COVID, because combining the requirements for isolation related to the illness has impacted these measures, but we remained committed to fully implementing Bill C-83 and ensuring that the SIUs are effective right across the country That's why the resources are being made available to Corrections Services Canada in these budgets I bring before you today.
I have a related question regarding a correctional investigator who makes report after report, but he's told our committee that he keeps making reports, and he expressed great frustration that the reports and recommendations that are made by him and others are being neglected and ignored by CSC and through that by the ministry. When are you going to start listening to what these reports have to say and implementing the recommendations? There's a great frustration. You give them a budget, but then you don't listen to them.
No, and with great respect, Jack, you're mischaracterizing that. I actually meet with Dr. Zenger quite frequently. I have a great deal of respect, and I listen very carefully to him. His recommendations have directly impacted on the work of my department and my work. I very much value his advice, and I understand he brings forward some very challenging issues. I think he performs an absolutely essential role in advocacy and as the investigator for corrections, and Mr. Saper before him, who's also someone whose work I very much valued. But I do listen to him very, very clearly, and frankly, your characterization of his frustration as being directed to me is a little bit of a
not
stretch.
to you.
Okay,
No, not to you. He didn't say it to you. He said the Corrections Service.
I think that both of you are going to have to carry this offline. So with that, we're going to go to Mr. Carrick for 5 minutes, please.
Thank you very much, Chair. Minister, regarding the first vote on the estimates, that you didn't, the question that was asked earlier about whether or not your Chief of Staff will be able to testify before committee, I wanted to give you the opportunity to answer simply yes or no, if you will bring that forward.
Again, we kind of went to that, and just so that no one will get upset, I've stopped the clock. I ruled that as marginal relevance to estimates. So if you could move on to another question, please. With
respect, Chair, I would simply say that the first vote that we have regards departmental finances, of which the office of the Minister is one of those line items.
Yes, and I suppose we could go into each and every one of his employees as well. With that, can you move on to a question of some relevance, please?
Okay, I will. I think that speaks volumes, Mr. Minister, that there's no answer on that. Minister, the Prime Minister promised in December that a First Nations Policing Act was coming soon. Can you tell the committee today what soon means?
Yeah, thanks very much. A very important question. One of the most important responsibilities that the Prime Minister has tasked me with is co-development.
Just a date will be fine.
Oh, I thought you wanted an answer to the question, Mr. Carrick.
Yeah, I'm asking when.
Could you clarify?
When is the First Nations Policing Act coming?
When the process of co-development with the First Nations across this country is complete. That process is already underway. We're meeting and that work is taking place. And we will complete that work when the work is completed, obviously.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you, Minister. There were some concerns, and I heard from frontline personnel that specifically at CBSA, they lacked PPE at the beginning of the pandemic, and some real frustrations that personnel at CBSA had, in the response to COVID. And most recently, I heard from a number of folks at CBSA and a level of frustration that you have frontline workers that have been given no priority in terms of being given access to vaccination. Is there a timeline to ensure that frontline workers at CBSA are able to get a vaccine?
Yeah, I'd invite you to direct that question to the provincial authorities. We're delivering vaccines on an accelerated pace to provincial health authorities right across the country, and they have that responsibility. I will also tell you, again, I think you mischaracterize it. I've met fairly frequently with CBSA officers in many parts of Canada. I hold fairly regular discussions with them, and we work very carefully and closely with them to make sure that they have the personal protection equipment, that they have all of the support that they need. And I'd agree with you. I think they've done an extraordinary job and continue to do an extraordinary job.
With respect, Minister,
can we shrink the answers a little bit here? The members are getting a little frustrated.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. And with respect, Minister, I think that there's been a number of departments and areas of federal responsibility that have ensured that frontline workers, and I would think that the front line of our country would be a priority to ensure that the staff that are under your supervision would be protected. Now, Now, Minister, you announced last October that there would be public health screening officers in place at all ports of entry. I believe you had said 190 of them by December of 2020. Yes or no, did that happen?
Yeah, thanks. Two parts of your question there. The first part is the recommendation for the National Advisory Committee on Immunization has identified frontline workers, including border service officers, as a priority in the second phase, and I'm led to believe by the provinces that second phase should begin very shortly.
So with respect, Minister, you said that there'd be 190 screening officers by December 2020. Were those 190 officers put in place? Yes or no?
Yeah, again, I'm not 100% sure what you're referring to there. I can tell you that there are 117 land border entries and 4 international airports that are receiving international.
It was referenced in your press release in December that there'd be 190. There'd be 190 locations that would have public health screening officers. So thank you very much for that, Minister. My colleague from Lakeland, who unfortunately couldn't be here today, asked you about 6 months ago whether or not you had spoken to the victims of the tragic Nova Scotia shooting. Have you had an opportunity to speak to those victims?
Yeah, thanks very much for the question. And in fact, we did respond to the victims of that inquiry and through their counsel. And in response, we've established a public inquiry. And once that inquiry is stand up, it's entirely inappropriate, as one might imagine. I hope you can, for any interference with the work of that public inquiry. It's now in the hands of the commissioners, and they have our full confidence and full support in the important work that they're doing.
Okay, thank you very much, Minister. And I think my time is running very, very close to an end. So I would just comment that I find it very troubling that Minister, you didn't answer the question about whether or not one of your staff paid for by taxpayers on one of the estimates that we'll be voting on today, whether or not you would ask directly to have that staff member, your chief of staff, respond to a request by Parliament to testify before a committee.
I think you made that point. For a final question, Mr. Iachino, 5 minutes, please.
Merci, Monsieur le Président, et Monsieur le Ministre.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Ministers and representatives. All of you, thank you for all of your work that you have done during this pandemic and for your presence, your consistent presence here before the committee. Minister, my riding has been repeatedly affected by flooding problems, and spring is coming. Could you please tell us how your funding program is going to be assisting the provinces and the regions which are subject to these damages?
Yeah, thank you very much for that very important question. As I said during my remarks, Angelo, one of the very significant increases in the public safety portion of the supplementaries that we're bringing forward is a significant increase in funds for the disaster relief fund that we make available to the provinces. It's in anticipation of the circumstances that you require. We work very closely and provide coordination in the response to all of those emergencies that can take place, floods, fires right across the country. And so we do provide, we work very closely with the provinces, and we provide support. And in addition to that, I can tell you that the Minister of Infrastructure has also been working with those same provincial and territorial partners and to provide infrastructure investments that can mitigate and prevent disasters such as floods. So it's not just a response, it's also preventative work. We see both as critically important, and we're doing that job.
Merci.
Thank you. This winter has been a little milder. Do you know what the forecasting is for potential snowmelt disasters?
Yeah, thank you very much. And it's an important question. I do receive regular briefings from the Government Operations Center that monitors all of those situations carefully. I would agree with you that we've been fortunate in our weather in the past, actually year and a half. And right now there are some areas that are identified as at risk, but it looks like the situation right across the country could be better than we've experienced, for example, 2 or 3 years ago. And you'll recall the terrible floods that occurred, particularly right across Quebec, and the terrible fires that took place mostly in Western Canada. All of those were hugely impactful. It looks like with the weather this year, we might be a little lucky, but I never count my chickens before they hatch. So we'll continue to monitor it really carefully.
Merci. Vous avez également rappelé l'appui financier.
Thank you. You also referred to additional $35 million in support. And you said that this was very important since the beginning of the pandemic. According to you, how did members of the Red Cross respond effectively to the call for assistance and support? And have they continued to pay special attention to the people who are living in long-term care homes, as well as Indigenous communities that are at risk?
Yeah, thanks very much, It's an important question. And it gives me an opportunity to acknowledge the incredible contribution of both the Red Cross and the Canadian Armed Forces. When we received requests back in April from the province of Quebec and the province of Ontario regarding the serious outbreak of coronavirus in the long-term care facilities, we were able to respond immediately. First of all, by sending Canadian Armed Forces members, over 1,350 of them, into both Ontario and Quebec, providing services in 47 different long-term care facilities. We then worked with the province of Quebec and the community to transition over to services being provided by the Canadian Red Cross, and they began providing that support in Quebec in July. To date, there have been over 2,500 Canadian Red Cross personnel, 190 sites in Quebec. I think they've done a great job. I've been very grateful for the support that we've received from Parliament in funding them, but I'm also very grateful for that they've stepped up and they've provided a great service. We continue, by the way, to work very closely with the province of Quebec. Several times the province asked us to stay and continue to help, and we have done so. But between the two of us, between our government and the province, a lot of very good work has been done to improve the situation at the long-term care facilities. And quite frankly, we begin to see a light at the end of the tunnel. But we have always been there, particularly for the province of Quebec when they asked, and we'll continue to do so.
Thank you, Mr. Giacono. You have about 15 seconds, which will not leave any time for even throat clearing. With that, we'll bring the first hour to an end. I want to thank the
Mr. Chair, point of order.
Committee. Yes, Mr. Motz.
I'm just, Chair, I'm a little concerned whether you or your colleagues on this committee will put the women who suffered harassment from General Vance ahead of your own Liberal membership and ask the minister to answer the question that he was asked twice.
Yes, and I've ruled now twice that inquiry is not material to this particular meeting.
Chair,
so with that,
Chair, sorry, point of privilege, actually. I take great offense to anyone claiming that I or any members of my colleagues on the committee or the minister don't care about the women who have been harassed in the Canadian Armed Forces. It's offensive that any of our colleagues, another MP, would even suggest that we condone that behavior.
Okay, with that, I am trying to bring the first hour to a close. I want to
point,
thank the
Mr. Chair.
Well,
point of order.
Bring this to a close, and you can bring your next point of order after I ask the minister to leave. So, on behalf of the committee, and we'll now move into the second hour. With that, Mr. Motz wishes to raise a point of order.
Yeah, a point of order, Chair. I would like to have the committee vote on the confidence of you and the chair to rule that out of order and have a vote on that at this time, please.
That's not a debatable motion, so we'll go to the vote immediately. You've heard the terms of Mr. Motz's essentially expression of lack of confidence in the chair on the ruling that was made. Mr. Clerk, would you call the roll?
Point of order, Chair.
Yes, Mr. Harris.
Is a motion of non-confidence in the chair out of order, or is this a motion to overrule the chair? I've never heard of a motion of non-confidence in the chair. Does that mean you have to resign or something?
Well, I think that would be the desire of Mr. Motz. Possibly I've mischaracterized it as a motion, but it is a.
It's about the ruling.
Dilatory. It's a dilatory motion and is not debatable. And So we just simply move to the vote. You've heard the motion, how I've characterized it, but Mr. Motz has made his motion. So with that, I'm going to call the roll. Mr. Clerk.
So if we could ask the clerk to read the question just to clarify exactly whether it's if we could hear the question first.
Okay, Mr. Clerk, can you repeat the question, whatever it is?
The question is, shall the chair's decision be sustained? So it's a challenge to the ruling, basically. So the question, then I'll repeat, is shall the chair's decision be sustained? And I will proceed to call the roll for those members present. Mr. Motz.
I vote against the ruling of the chair.
Mr. Couric.
I also vote against.
Ms. Block.
Against.
Mr. Van Popta.
I vote against the ruling.
Madame Michaud.
En faveur.
In favor.
Mr. Harris.
In favor.
Ms. Damoff.
Was that my name?
Yes, Ms. Damoff.
Oh, sorry. When it switches between French and English, it's really quiet. I vote yes.
Monsieur Iacono.
En faveur.
In favor.
Kara.
Yes.
Mr. Sidhu.
Sorry, Mr. Clerk, was that me?
Yes.
Yes.
Monsieur Lightbound.
En faveur.
Mr. Chair, yeas pour 7, nays contre 4. 4.
Thank you, colleagues, for that ringing endorsement. Maybe I should bring up the impeachment motion now that I'm on a roll. With that, I'm going to then turn to my good friend, Mr. Motz, who has 6 minutes, I believe. Yes, Mr. Motz, Madame Damoff, Madame Michaud, Mr. Harris for 6 minutes each. Unless I'm guided otherwise, we have 1 hour, but within that hour, we also have to vote on the estimates. So I'll probably call the questioning to an end around 5 or 10 minutes prior to the 1 hour. So, Mr. Motz, you have 6 minutes.
Thank you, Chair. And to think I was going to compliment you on your earlier activities from this week. So,
Yeah.
Anyway, I just want to rest assured to Ms. Geddes and Commissioner Lucky and a few of the others that are on from different organizations. I won't be questioning you today. I want to focus my questions specifically to Mr. Stewart and the issues around public safety. Now, the public safety team. And it's about our emergency preparedness, sir. So the minister has told the committee here just recently that many aspects of the pandemic response is not and was not his responsibility, despite him being the minister for emergency preparedness. So I just need to be clarified, just to clarify for me, is this public safety department responsible for emergency preparedness and planning across the government as set out in the Emergency Management Act?
Yes, sir. And it is in many ways, although not entirely.
Okay, so the Emergency Management Act states that the minister is, and I will quote, responsible for exercising leadership related to the emergency management in Canada by coordinating among government institutions and cooperation with provinces and other entities emergency management activities. So I guess my question then, sir, is was the COVID-19 pandemic ever considered an emergency under the Emergency Management Act?
The answer to that is no, not under the Emergencies Act.
So even though provinces, Emergency Management Act, so even though provinces invoked states of emergency, that did not trigger any federal powers under the Emergency Management Act, not the Emergency Measures Act.
to be clear, then, yes, sorry, I beg your pardon. On the Emergency Management Act, it enfranchises the minister to do a number of things, including to coordinate requests for assistance from provinces and territories, which have happened on a numerous basis over the past 12 months. So he is the counterpart to those jurisdictions when those requests are made.
Okay, so I guess I think you asked, or you thought my question was about the Emergency Measures Act, and it was
Yes,
the Emergency Management Act. A huge difference, as we both know.
Yes.
So I just there were clear national emergency management plans in place to respond to pandemics in this country. In fact, Canada was at the table with the World Health Organization in 2019 when they did their influenza planning, and they prepared those documents. So can you explain to Canadians why Canada's emergency management pandemic plans have been ignored during this pandemic?
I'm afraid I'm not going to be able to agree with the premise of the question. I don't think that the emergency management plans have been ignored. I think they have been functioning as they were laid out. Now, obviously, the pandemic is an event of a magnitude which was, in a sense, unprecedented. If you go back to the Spanish flu, perhaps that would be equivalent. But I think that we've had plans in place for interdepartmental coordination, which is what the Department of Public Safety does to work with the Public Health Agency of Canada and other provinces and territories, their emergency management organizations.
Okay. Thank you, sir. I'm just, so given that, can you undertake to table to this committee the emergency management plans that are in place and pre-COVID and how those were implemented in Canada for this pandemic? That would be awesome. Thank you. So we saw, and we the news obviously reported, and we all experienced it, that there's been the Senate drafted reports on the state of readiness in Canada's emergency management systems over the last number of years, and both reports highlighted a lot of issues for us, which have been again exacerbated in with the pandemic. So has there been any significant review of the emergency preparedness of Canada launched, sir, since the pandemic hit last February, March?
We have launched work on reviewing our preparedness in a number of dimensions. I would have to say that it's at its early stage because we're still very much preoccupied with responding to the pandemic as it exists today. And to say for any second that we have the resources necessary to do both things simultaneously would be a mistake. We are fully occupied with the resources we have in dealing with the various issues that we are confronted, including responding to events in First Nations and rolling out the vaccine, et cetera.
So understanding that you haven't had time to look at improving in our emergency response and readiness, and that's something that'll certainly the department will be undertaking moving forward. Has public safety been involved in restocking or restoring our early warning system that we know was shut down by public health by the Health Canada prior to the pandemic?
That question needs to be directed to the Public Health Agency because that's where that early warning system resides.
Okay, thank you. I believe that's my time, Chair.
It is indeed. Thank you. Madame Demop, 6 minutes, please.
Thank you, Chair. Commissioner Lucky, my first question is for you, and I don't think you'll be surprised. I'm going to ask you about the report on Colton Bushy's death. You and I have talked about this in the past. I was pleased to see the report come out, and it certainly confirmed what I heard from the family when I spoke to Debbie Baptiste and Jade. The report from the CRCC said that there was that the family experienced racism and discrimination. I guess, and I really appreciate that you have said you were going to be implementing, I think it's 16 of the 17 recommendations. But my question, Commissioner, is that the same day the report was made public, the RCMP union put out a press release. And in it, it said that the CRCC report advances a perspective that disrespects our
Point of order, Mr. Chair.
Yes, Mr. Carrick.
For the last 10 or 15 seconds, we lost audio in the room. So if there was no sound for about the last 10 seconds of Ms. Damoff's question.
Are we back on? Are we back on?
I don't know. Can you hear me now? I don't think so.
Damien, can you hear?
We can now. It just went, the entire room went quiet there for about 10 seconds before my point of order.
Oh.
Was the commissioner able to hear okay? Okay.
Okay, so let's continue and
okay.
and adjust.
So anyway, continuing on in their press release, they said that the CRCC's words were their finding of discrimination was based on a, quote, social, legal, and historical context, including colonial assertions, stereotypes, and a troubled history of police and Indigenous peoples' relations, end quote. These broad brush findings about our members is not constructive to reconciliation. Commissioner, I was shocked when I read their press release, and I just wonder, how are you going to bring your members along to end this systemic racism that exists in the RCMP?
Thank you for that question, Ms. Damoff. I listened to Ms. Baptiste and heard what she had to say, and I so have a lot of empathy for her family and what she endured, and she deserved to be treated with sensitivity and respect and compassion. And as the commissioner of the RCMP, it's my job, and that's part of my mandate, to ensure that the culture is transformed and that we increase, strengthen our relationships with Indigenous people, and in fact, all Canadians increasing trust. And so many of it is we've brought in Vision 150 with many activities that I've spoken to you about before, but some of the more recent things that we have done is we brought in an entire equity, diversity, and inclusion strategy, the first time ever in the RCMP, that the objective is to change the culture and transform the RCMP. And some of it's keys to addressing the racism and the discrimination. There's activities in there that include modernizing the recruitment and the training. And we've talked about the cultural and humility, cultural awareness and humility training as part of, even though while this the report was getting prepared, we were busy working on the recommendations. And in Saskatchewan, in April, all of the employees in Saskatchewan will have completed that course. And I've given a very aggressive goal for the entire RCMP to complete that course before the end of summer. And we were already at approximately 16,000 of the 30,000 employees who've completed that. So many steps.
Yeah, and Commissioner, I appreciate the work that you're trying to do. My concern is, having read the Bastarache report, which I actually couldn't even read in one sitting. It was so upsetting. And then, validation for Debbie Baptiste and what happened to her family in the most recent report from the CRCC. But if the union is not accepting what is happening, how are we going to move the RCMP to actually, training someone who doesn't want to be trained, or training someone who says that it's disrespectful to their members? No one is saying individual members are racist, but we are saying there's systemic racism in the organization. And quite frankly, the officers who treated Debbie Baptiste the way they were racist towards her. So how are you going to square that, Commissioner?
With a lot of hard work. It's a brand new union, just recently started. A lot of work with the relationships with the union, obviously, but it's about the leadership, and it's about providing sort of from start to finish. So making sure that when we go to our recruitment, that we are bringing in the right people. And we have just recently included an implicit bias test in our recruitment strategy, so that people will be tested for that. And it continues on through training. And we're doing a full review of the training at Depot, and including various cultural exercises so that we can, in fact, bring those people, not only bring in the right people, but train them along the way. And that continues throughout their career.
I only have about 30 seconds, but are you working with Indigenous organizations and peoples to develop the programs that you're doing for the officers?
Absolutely. Every decision we make going forward, I've said that we will talk with people most impacted by our decisions. And so the Indigenous women's organizations, we've signed MOUs to work, and not only on racism and discrimination, but gender-based violence and things that they are most impacted by. Our anti-racism course that we're in the midst of developing is in fact with Indigenous people, as was our cultural humility, cultural awareness and humility course was done in conjunction with those Indigenous groups.
Thanks,
Okay, we're going to have to leave it there. Thank you, Ms. Danwald. The clerk advises me that there is a problem in the room. They are working on trying to fix it, but it's not a problem online. So with that, Madame Michaud, 6 minutes, s'il vous plaît.
Merci, Monsieur le Président.
6 minutes. Thank you, Chair. Yes, I have a question for Ms. Gilly. I have a question about the COVID bonus in terms of a healthy environment for employees. And we know that the last year has been so difficult for employees of the civil service, particularly those who are working in penitentiaries, where remote work was not an option. They had to be on site. Several of them, nearly 300 members, were infected by COVID-19. There's a risk a premium that was requested by members of the union. Has any agreement been made about this? Are the amounts included in these estimates?
Ça, c'est quelque chose.
This is something that has to be discussed with Treasury Board. Thank you. In that case, I would continue regarding correctional service having requested $100 million related to class action suits. Could you tell us more about this? What would this do? Have there been lawsuits? Why was there a requirement for additional funding? Yes, it's because there were class action lawsuits, and recent court rulings have occurred, and this is to be able to meet our obligations as a result of these court rulings. And what were the lawsuits about? These were related to preventive isolation. So inmates who sued regarding the kind of treatment they were subjected to? In the previous model, yes. Thank you. I know that COVID-19 led to greater financial needs. Correctional service requested additional funding in the recent year because of the fund for essential and critical operating needs related to COVID-19. What is that additional funding used for? Are we talking about personal protective equipment? Are we talking about something else? Yes, it was for PPE. In addition, cleaning had to take place in a more in-depth fashion. Also, for testing staff as well as inmates. There was also a component for overtime because, of course, when we had employees who were testing positive and who had contacts, close contacts, obviously they had to stay home. Some of that money is also for IT because people who had to work from home, they needed certain equipment. So there were a series of items that were requested. Thank you. Now I'd like to ask some questions of Madam Lackey regarding the RCMP. During the study on systemic racism in the police, we heard testimony from Micheline Lahaye from the Complaints Commission, and she said the Commission has to have sufficient resources so as to be able to perform systemic reviews, and for the time being, these only happen when there are sufficient resources to allow them. As President, she has to always choose between processing complaints and carrying out systemic reviews. And between the main estimates 2021 and 21-22, we see that there is a slight increase for the Complaints Commission. Do you feel that that increase is sufficient so as to ensure that you can really adequately respond to the complaints and carry out these systemic reviews? Thank you for your question.
For me to respond to that, because I'm not sure how they allocate their finances and whether they need what kind of money they do need. What I can say is that we obviously rely on them for oversight, and it's good for our organization when we have that oversight. So anything that can help them helps us.
Merci. Et je reviendrai peut-être.
Thank you. If I could now go back to the union who had said that there was a lack of resources, but expenditures are supposed to be reduced every year until 2023-24. Is there any intention to increase personnel or resources, human resources? Because we see that there may be a lack of staff, of officers. Is there any consideration given to this?
Is this for the RCMP or the
Non.
correction?
Non, ce serait l'agence.
No, it was for CBSA.
For the question, no, we're not anticipating the need for new officers right now. Our focus is about keeping our officers healthy. We've obviously been able to sort of keep many of them away from shifts because the volumes simply haven't been there. So there's no need for new officers right now beyond what we would normally staff up for normal attrition.
You have about 15 seconds left.
Okay. Est-ce que vous avez eu des indications?
Have you received any indications from the minister regarding firearms traffic at the border and how you ought to deal with that?
That's a pretty important question, but there's no time left to answer it. I'm sorry.
Merci.
Mr. Harris, 6 minutes, please.
Thank you, Chair. My first question is for the CBSA representatives. In last October, there was a Supreme Court of Canada decided in a case called Fraser versus Canada Attorney General that the RCMP had discriminated against women members of the RCMP who had a job sharing situation after serving maternity leave. They were not given access to buyback pension for that lost time, although the policy within the RCMP and the legislation provided that other forms of lack of full-time service was able to happen. So it was considered discriminatory contrary to the Charter of Rights. There's a similar circumstances in the Canadian Border Services with job sharing and women taking advantage of this. And when approached to have this apply to the Canadian Border Services pension, a woman was told that this didn't apply because it was that was a case was about the RCMP Superannuation Act. Does the department expect that these women who are affected by this ought to spend whatever time and money it takes to go to the Supreme Court of Canada to get a ruling there, or are you prepared to apply this to the women in the Canadian Border Services or retired women in this case who are seeking the same application of this law? I've written the minister on this some weeks ago, and I'm wondering whether you're aware of this issue and whether you plan to reconsider this policy in light of the Supreme Court of Canada decision.
Thank you for the question. So I'm not aware of the specifics of that particular case, but this is something that would be determined by the Treasury Board as they're the employer and sets the rules around these types of accesses to these funds. So I can follow up with the Treasury Board on the specifics of this, but there's nothing that we have in terms of a policy per se around this issue.
Well, the response that was given by the CBSA, not by the Treasury Board, that they say it doesn't apply. And so I would like that follow. I've written the minister, and I've just wondered whether or not this had been passed down. I know you're here and you're chief financial, according to my notes that you have a financial officer here as well, but neither of you is aware of that circumstance.
Not that specific case, no.
Well, what about the policy?
I would defer to my colleague, Jonathan, or are you aware of anything?
Thanks so much for the question. I'm not aware of a specific case, but I think, as the President said, there is a difference between the CBSA and the RCMP in that all of our staff are subject to the Treasury Board policies and procedures. And so therefore, in our case, this is a Treasury Board matter. My understanding is the RCMP is not subject to the same Treasury Board procedures. Thank you.
Well, this wouldn't be a Treasury Board decision. This is a Supreme Court of Canada decision, sir, and it applies on the basis of the Charter of Rights and the very similar circumstances. And I wonder why it is that you wouldn't consider applying that policy and give a perfunctory answer like that. I have a question. I'll pass on to something else. I wish to go to the Commissioner Lucky, and I want to ask further question on the Bushy report that we had this week. And of course, we all know it was disturbing, and I appreciate that your commissioner, you and the RCMP have acknowledged that both systemic racism and actual racism had occurred. I want to ask about a further matter that was disclosed, I think, publicly for the first time this week, although RCMP about this for some time. The fact that on the night that of the Colton Bushy was killed, there was communications between RCMP communications in the course of attending at the Bushy family home and Miss Baptiste, and that communications were destroyed. Now, we don't know what was on those communications, but the implication obviously is that there may have been matters on this communication which would be of importance to the investigation being done by the CRCC or any other investigation. And it sounds that it could easily be something very close to obstruction. Has the individuals involved in this destruction been identified and dealt with through disciplinary matters, Commissioner Lucky?
No, they have not. When the request came from the CRCC, by that time, those recordings had already been destroyed. What had happened is when those recordings were examined completely by our major crimes investigators who took care of that investigation, a full review is done of all relevant material that comes in. There was no relevancy on those particular recordings, and there was no evidentiary value. So they were just left where they get stored in their usual manner. And within 2 years, as per the Retentions Act, it got destroyed. And then CRC asked for that, and that's why we couldn't produce them. But in no way was it a cover-up. But I will say, as a result of that, I have directed a policy review on that to ensure that our retention in such matters is in line with the reality.
15 seconds, Mr. Harris.
Yes, now, so that you're suggesting that despite the fact that there was a CRCC investigation going on, the normal conditions applied, why would it not be saved but so that the commission could decide whether it was relevant or not your internal investigation?
Very briefly.
They worked obviously in silos, and that they didn't find the evidentiary value in regards to the criminal code case. Therefore, that it was left in its normal storage.
And neither was a report, neither was an internal report released either.
Thank you, Mr. Harris. Colleagues, we are now at 6:22. We're supposed to end at 6:49, and we have a vote to take. If we're going to run over, almost regardless. So I'm going to say 4 minutes for 4, 2 and 2, and then 4 and 4, starting with Mr. Van Popta.
Good, thank you. I have a question for Correction Services Canada. We received a report from the correctional investigator, and in that report he expressed some frustration, maybe exasperation, that his earlier recommendation about education and vocational training in federal corrections wasn't being followed. And so he just repeated that same recommendation again in his most recent report. So my question is whether the funding that is being made available now is going to see some results in that area.
Thank you for the question. The funding that's been made available in terms of, if you're talking about IMIT, it was more for, it's COVID related, and it was for people that work remotely. However, the OCI, we take his recommendation very seriously. And actually, we have done some work around education. So for example, we have a digital education program that started at Bath Institution, and it's been very successful. We're monitoring it and seeing if it can't be expanded to other institutions. We do a full review of the employment that we provide. So again, there's a lot of work that's being done in both education, employment, and employability skills.
So what's new now that wasn't there that the correctional investigator was responding to? What was his source of frustration that today is going to be resolved?
What the correctional investigator is mentioning is that, and we're working on a broader digital strategy, but it's really, again, we have computers in our institutions. We don't have that many. So what we want to do is obviously it's kind of get with the times. However, our institutions are quite old, so it requires some infrastructure. But in the meantime, as I said,
so are you asking for more funding to solve that problem? That is one of the problems that the investigator identified: outmoded information technology.
Yes, he talked about our antiquated institutions. Absolutely, but we have taken steps. So for example, as I said, the digital education program is one step. The other one with COVID-19, we had to rethink how we delivered programs. So we're doing it now virtually. That's something else. And with the correctional investigator, I have to say that I think our goal is a common goal. We want to see offenders safely and successfully reintegrate the community.
Of course, that's what we all want. But I just go back to the frustration that he expressed, that he had made that recommendation on a number of occasions and it wasn't responded to. Is it going to be different this time?
Actually, we again, we look at all of the recommendations that the OCI makes and we act upon them. But obviously, what I do as the commissioner is look at our priorities, I look at the resources, I look at where we're at. And actually, one thing that we've done here is we've looked at all the recommendations that were made by the OCI to see whatever is outstanding and whatever hasn't been completely implemented. We've done that work.
Good. Well, we'll see next year. So, Mr. Chair, do I still have
10 seconds, unfortunately.
I was going to re-ask the question that Madame Michaud didn't get an answer to about smuggling firearms.
Well, she's going to get another shot in about 2 minutes. With that, Mr. Lightbound, 4 minutes, please.
Merci, Monsieur le Président. Et je vais faire.
Thank you, Chair. And I would like to repeat the questions of my colleague, Pam Damoff, and direct the question to Commissioner Lucky. And it's about the RCMP culture. In this committee, we've heard from several witnesses, including Judge Bastarache, who have described the kind of cultural problems that are so deep in the RCMP, whether we're talking about systemic racism, sexual harassment, sexism. I'm encouraged that you have the wish to reform this institution. It's necessary to reform it, and I'm glad that you've accepted the 16 of the Bushy Report recommendations. I heard you speak in response to my colleague's question about Vision 150 and the strategy for equity, diversity, and inclusion that you would like to advance. Strategies are wonderful, but one has to be able to measure their success. And this is my question for you. How are you going to measure success? What are you relying on to judge the kind of progress or absence thereof at the RCMP?
Merci pour votre question.
Thank you for your question. We have several ways of measuring progress.
All of our initiatives are on the outside website, RCMP Tracker. And we have milestones for each and every one of those initiatives. And you can see how far we are going along with it. Holistically, obviously, the markers are going to be a more inclusive, a more open, a more less discriminatory organization that is more transparent and more accountable in the bigger sense. We are doing a lot of collaboration with our management advisory board, who have in regards to the actual measures. In some of the specific things, we actually have our audit committee doing a specific audit on Vision 150, and there is obviously a management action plan with specific measurements of completion. So hopefully we will have everything measured with our success. And I guess the biggest measure of success is that the next commissioner won't have to answer this question at committee.
J'aime bien cette dernière phrase que vous venez de mentionner. On le souhaite aussi autour de...
I very much appreciate that last sentence, and we all feel the same way, believe me. I think I have about a minute left, so last question. So during this time of cultural change at the RCMP, we see that there are 300 files backlogged at the External Review Committee at the RCMP. For what about the additional sums added over the last year for the committee? With the hiring of additional staff, have you seen any reduction in this backlog to be dealt with?
I think, if I can maybe correct you, you might be referring to the Civilian Review Complaints Commission, where the backlog is, where the majority of the backlog is. And we have committed, under my direction and my leadership, we have the first ever MOU with the CRCC with specific service standards, which is 6 months. We currently have reduced the backlog to 120 files, and we are committed to eliminating that backlog by the end of the year. In the meantime, every single file that comes in as of April 1st will be meeting the 6-month service standard. It is so important that Canadians get a timely response, because it's not easy to come forward in the first place to make a complaint. And then if they have to wait years for a response, that's unacceptable.
Thank you, Mr. Lightman. Madame Michaud, 2 minutes, s'il vous plaît.
Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Madame Michaud, 2 minutes. Thank you, Chair. I'd like to take advantage of this opportunity to go back to my question for Mr. Ozarski regarding smuggling and firearms traffic. The minister talked about this a little bit previously and said that's in the plans and it's on the drawing board with Bill C-21 to deal with this scourge. But have you had any indications from the cabinet, the minister, or yourself? Have you proposed any plan? Because you were saying earlier that you didn't necessarily need any additional staff or any human resources. So how are you seeing the situation to deal with this scourge?
So I think what the minister was alluding to was that starting in budget 2018-19, the agency received $80 million over 5 years and about $7 million ongoing. There's 5 activity areas. As you alluded to, one of them was an infrastructure project for the detector dogs, which were amping up our capacity. What's new is since the new administration to the south, and what the minister was talking about was the cross-border task force on firearms, and that's where we'll be working with our public safety colleagues on the cross-border crime forum to coordinate activities, to share intelligence, and to sort of look at those flows and update our ability to augment our ability to intercept firearms at the border.
Alors, je comprends que vous êtes en train de travailler.
So I understand that you're working on it, so it's not yet in place. Do you have any idea of when this is going to be implemented?
Well, we've already started in terms of working on an information sharing agreement with the Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms Agency. And since this announcement, which was literally within the past few weeks, we've already reached out and started to work with our colleagues to the south and here in Canada to coordinate how we would actually take advantage of this opportunity.
Merci, Madame Michaud.
Thank you, Madame Michaud.
2 minutes.
Thank you, Chair. And that's going to follow up on some of the questions of Commissioner Lucky regarding oversight. And it's been a concern that the public is not aware of much of what's going on. and there's a need for greater transparency. We know that the CRCC is underfunded, according to the complaints commissioner, and you've indicated some efforts being made by you to look after the backlog, which is commendable. But there's another issue that, in terms of transparency, in last November, the information commissioner said that the RCMP was neglectful, and that 92% of ATIP requests went beyond the statutory due date and called it at a critical level. So what's being done to resolve that? That's a pretty important statutory obligation as well, and people have the right to information. That's part of the information commissioner's job, to ensure that that happens. What are you doing about that? Is there a need for further resources for that, or is this something that you're not taking seriously?
Thank you for that question. That's a great question, and I think I have to say that we haven't done Canadians justice in our ATIP program whatsoever. We have an extreme backlog, and we are working with Treasury Board through a ministerial directive to come up. We are presenting a strategy to the minister in the next month and a half. We have received funding to hire additional resources, and we have changed a bit of our triage process. I've been in conversation with the Privacy Commissioner twice now, and we're actually, she's complimented us on our progress week over week since we put our mind to the matter, and it's a perfect example, Mr. Harris, on the things you measure get done, and so we have to get better at that, and we will. I'm completely committed to better transparency for Canadians.
Thank you, Mr. Harris. Mr. Kirk, 4 minutes, please.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair, and I'm glad that I get the opportunity to ask a few more questions. To the CBSA, I've heard a number of stories from constituents about challenges related to being deported because of paperwork, or not being able to get relevant information because of the limitations of government in the midst of the pandemic. Now, I understand there was about 12,000 people deported over the course of the pandemic. Is there a ratio as to how many were deported for public safety reasons versus how many were deported for not having the proper applications, delays in paperwork processing, that sort of thing?
Thank you for the question. So far for this fiscal year, we're about 11,000 people that have been removed from the country. And I think it's important to understand that anyone that's removed has to have exhausted all of their due process available to them. If it's in the case of somebody from an immigration side, we would support the minister in terms of hearings before the Immigration Refugee Board. Once they've exhausted all of their avenues of appeal, then we would start the removal process. Obviously, it's very slow in terms of removals right now because of the airlines and the lack of capacity to travel. In terms of people with serious inadmissibility, of those close to 11,000 removals, about 350 or so, I think, are serious inadmissibility. So this could be any number of different criminal offenses or danger assessments that have been made and subsequently moved. And as just a final point on this is that as soon as somebody is deemed that they need to be removed, we are required by law to remove them as soon as possible.
So has there been a mechanism put into place to ensure that those that might fall through the cracks, especially because of challenges in processing paperwork in the midst of the pandemic, both in Canada and other jurisdictions, to ensure that that there's fair and due process with those things in mind?
Absolutely. As I mentioned, the Immigration Refugee Board is the agency responsible for, it's a quasi-judicial tribunal that makes those assessments.
Okay. Thank you for that. Now, could you enlighten me on what the total backlog for deportations for individuals who are deemed to be, significant public safety or national security threats are?
There's not much of a backlog. Obviously, it's a dynamic kind of thing in terms of people coming in and then leaving, and so it varies. But we endeavor to remove people as quickly as possible.
Okay.
In terms of danger to the public, then we would detain them.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you for that. So there's not a specific number that you have that is a backlog specifically because of the pandemic. Just to clarify.
I can get you that information.
Sure. Please, if you could, that would be helpful. Specifically with regards to CBSA, I'd asked the minister about a specific program to ensure that that the frontline staff, literally the front line of our country, and certainly because of the origins of the pandemic, and certainly the government has talked a lot about border security measures, and Conservatives called for some strong measures, and certainly there's a whole bunch of politics in that. But I found it troubling that the minister was just left it up to the provinces to deal with the vaccine situation for frontline staff. Just wondering if the CBSA could comment on that, and if there's been any plan or any indication that there will be administration of vaccines to our borders front lines.
We're way past the time for Mr. Kirk, and so and in addition, it's unlikely that a civil servant will comment on a minister's answer. So with that, we'll move on to the final 4 minutes. Mr. Iachino and Madame Kara are going to split that 4 minutes, apparently.
Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, Chair. Madam Commissioner, as you know, the penitentiaries and detention centres were not spared by the pandemic. In my riding of Alfred Pellan, many cases were detected at the federal training centres, and more recently in the Laval Immigration Centre. I know that you are tracking these issues closely. Could you give us a brief update on the situation in these institutions?
Sorry, was that question for me?
I thought it was Miss Kelly, Madame Kelly, was it not? Have we lost Commissioner Kelly?
Non, c'est moi.
Okay.
J'étais sur.
Sorry, I was on mute. I apologize. Yes, I can give you an update on the institutions, and I can also take this opportunity to say that the staff has done a phenomenal job in managing COVID-19. In terms of the institutions, we have 13 active cases at Drumheller, 1 in Stony Mountain in the medium security unit, and 1 in Saspen, also in the medium security unit. So that's 15 active cases at this time across the country. We have no active cases in Quebec.
Sorry. Oui, justement, vous avez mentionné les.
Yes, you mentioned employees who've done very important work. Could you explain to us more concretely how the $135.8 million announced will contribute to assisting them in continuing to do this good work? Yes, these sums of money will be for equipment for staff, as well as for cleaning that's required in the institutions. Additionally, it's also for testing of staff and inmates. There is also a certain component for overtime, because naturally there have been challenges when staff was testing positive. And of course, there's a component for information technology and also for equipment so that people can work remotely from home.
And a half.
Thank you. My question is for Commissioner Lucky. Commissioner Lucky, in both of the supplementary estimates and the mains, the RCMP sought funding for the establishment of the Independent Center for Harassment Resolution, which will oversee the resolution process. Obviously, this has been seen as a responsive, has been seen responses to the extremely troubling findings of the Bastarache report. My question is, in your opinion, how will this independent center bring about better outcomes, and what other measures have you taken to respond to the Bastarache recommendations?
Thank you for that question. The Independent Center for Harassment Resolution is there to, first of all, be compliant with Bill C-65, which came into play in January. It's also to provide a transparent and trusted system where people who want to bring harassment complaints can do so in a safe and non-retaliatory manner as per Justice Bastarash's recommendations in that report. It's will be externalized so that it will be outside the chain of command as far as investigators go, who will actually make the finding of harassment or not, and that will be done externally. So it will increase the trust amongst our employees in that regard.
Okay, I think that brings it to a close. I want to, on behalf of the committee, thank the witnesses for their attendance and their service to our country in very difficult circumstances. It's probably not said enough how much we do appreciate you, even though we may ask some very direct questions from time to time. And you can rest assured that there will be more direct questions to be asked from time to time. So with that, I'll invite the witnesses to leave, ask colleagues to turn to the votes that are before us. And I'll seek the guidance of the clerk as to how to conduct these votes. We could do it on division, or but I'll or we'll just call them one by one. It's up to colleagues. Is there any? The first vote that's up before us is votes 1 and 5 under Canada Border Services Agency. Shall that vote carry?
On division? And Chair, if I may indulge you and the clerk, if we're able to lump some of these, our position will be on division, and we'll leave it to the clerk to determine which ones we can, and you to do which ones we can group together to have that happen.
So I'll take guidance as well from the clerk, but it looks like
point of order, I would certainly agree with that.
Yeah. Mr. Clerk, can all of these votes be done on division?
Yes, they can, if they want to group them.
Okay. So may I then move that all of the votes for the Department of Public Safety, National Security, Office of Correctional Investigator, Parole Board, Royal Canadian Mounted Police, Royal Canadian Mounted Police External Review Committee, Secretariat of the National Security and Intelligence be moved on division?
On division.
Okay, agreed. Okay, and shall I report the main estimates to the House?
Yes.
Okay, thank you with that. And it's always a good day to survive a non-confidence and an impeachment vote. Thank you, Glenn, for that.
Anytime, John. Anytime. It's a belated birthday present.
We didn't go with the impeachment vote.
Yeah,
you might not have succeeded so well.
I wanted an impeachment vote. I want to be right up there with Donald Trump. Gee. Yeah. Anyways, thank you, folks. And for the next 2 weeks, whatever it is you do, be safe.
We want to keep you around, John. Good job. Thank you.
Okay. Have a good Easter, everyone.
Right, take care, Chair.
Have a good
Take care.
Happy Easter, everybody.
You as well.